Let's start. So, hi everyone. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Lior, product manager for Salto, responsible for the Jira part. But the star of the show today is Rachel, who will introduce herself. We'll talk today about breaking your Jira instances and how to try and avoid it. And after Rachel's talk, I'll show you some tips from the Salto side, short demo, which hopefully helps you avoid some of the scenarios that Rachel is going to show. Rachel, hi, please take it
Hi,
from
Laura.
here.
Thanks for having me. Awesome. Well, as I always say, it's a great day to talk about Jira. So I'm excited to be here with Salto to tell you about, so many production mistakes that I've made. And hopefully you will avoid making them or at least laugh along with me if you've made these in the past yourself. Um, so let's get going. How many times has someone said to you, help, Jira's broken again, or I can't submit my request and the deadline's in 30 minutes? Happens to me a lot. Users have come running to my desk with some kind of Jira problem, more than I'd like to admit, and some of those I have caused. So today I'm here to share some of my configuration mistakes that either I've made or I've seen over the years, and also identify some of the risky Jira configuration changes and strategies to manage them. And that includes, good change management, sandboxes, testing, backup strategies, all sorts of things to lower your risk. And I know that your administrators are busy enough, so let's try to do some of those preventable emergencies. And then I'll share some resources to help you with Jira's configuration and answer any questions. And then, as Leora said, my friends at Salto will show you how their app helps you take control of your Jira configuration. I'm really excited for you to see that. Okay, so let's start talking about some of my bigger configuration mistakes. Well, it's a small one. This one has a lower impact, but this one occurred because of shared schemes. And luckily, it was a relatively minor problem. But this story needs a little bit of background. So, how many Jira administrators do you have at your organization? So, at this company, they had 132. Not a joke. There is no way to properly manage an application with that many admins. Everybody was making changes in the background, changes at once, stepping over each other. And of course, I recommend a strong 2 to 5 person admin team of users who really care and know about the application. So this mistake might not have happened if there weren't 132 people making changes at the same time. So one of these admins decided one day that he wanted a new custom field. And here's the screen scheme that he edited. And as you can see, this scheme is shared by 27 other projects. And this admin oversaw our Siebel system, and that's customer relationship management software. So he created a custom field called Siebel ID, and he added it to his Jira project. But he didn't realize that adding it would show up in other projects as well. So the HR and legal teams weren't too happy. They reported this problem, and he actually told them, just ignore the field, it doesn't apply to you. I don't think that's a solution. Um, Instead, he should have created a new screen scheme just for this use case or used a new field configuration, anything but impact other Jira projects. So that's a little one. Here's one that's a little worse. It's low impact, but I made this mistake. And matter of fact, I've made it recently too. So I'll add in a little bonus story about this. So I love workflow conditions. I think they're so helpful. Anything that you can have the machine do that a human doesn't have to do, I think is super valuable. But I've learned that even the smallest behavior change needs testing. So in this example, I added a validator just to require the impact field during a workflow transition. And then I promptly went on vacation. Well, had I tested this change at all, I would have caught this simple mistake immediately. All I needed to do was open up an issue and transition it as an end user and see what happened. Well, that 30-step test would have revealed this problem. That transition couldn't succeed because the user had no way to enter the required information. So that impact field that we were requiring, it wasn't on a screen. There was no transition screen containing the field, and users lost the ability to transition their issues in that workflow. And luckily, a colleague of mine was able to fix the problem, and people could start using Jira again while I was out of the office. So that's pretty terrible. But yesterday, literally yesterday, I did the exact same thing. I thought this was an old mistake that I could say I never made again. I was on with a client. I was showing them how to import issues via CSV, and they were going to import the status field. And they wanted a specific status that the issues would start in, but that status was not in the workflow. So I said, okay, well, let's just change the workflow. We'll change it to something easy that we know works, and then we'll finish our import. Well, I had tested import 5 times before the call just to make sure all the data was perfect, all the data was coming in the way I wanted it to, no issues, right? Well, during the call, we made that quick, seemingly innocuous workflow change. We changed the issue type to a workflow that was already used by the project, and then we went back to our import. And what did I not do? I didn't test it. So I didn't really understand what rules were in the background that would, come to haunt me with this import. So we were trying to import and it kept failing, kept failing. I'm looking at the log. The log's not telling me anything helpful. So we're checking the data just to make sure it's the right data. We're doing all these things in the background. And the whole time it was a workflow validator. So, I've been at this now for a long time, right? Been Jira administrator for a very, very long time, and I still make these silly, stupid mistakes. So I apologize to the client, and we made it a learning, a learning opportunity, and I will try to prevent that from happening again. Luckily, it was just wasted time. We didn't impact any other users, but wasted time is money. So, all right, well, that's my story from yesterday. This next one, it's a more impactful error. And I know many of you have made this too. So I've heard from you that I'm not the only one. But once I used the workflow diagram visual mode to change a status, so this example, the backlog status. So I selected backlog and I clicked on the edit button on the right. And I thought I was changing which status that I wanted to use, and that change would apply just to this one workflow. Well, if you've ever done this, you know that this changes the name of the field itself in all of Jira. So a user's alerted me to a problem which impacted 15 workflows and hundreds of filters. Oh, that was a bad day. And by the way, if you make that change in the workflow editor, the global status name changes immediately, even if you discard the workflow draft. So don't do it there. Instead, go to text mode and literally change the status you're using. Don't change the name of a status. Okay, so here's a silly mistake, but it could have led to downtime. So one day when I was editing an announcement banner in Jira Server, my cat jumped up onto my keyboard and he submitted my half-written code. Now, he submitted or edited Jira issues in the past, but his careless paw placement this day really, really caused a problem. So my half-written code caused Jira's page not to render any content. I couldn't even load this announcement banner page to fix it. So in Server, I had to stop the application, remove the announcement banner records in the database, and restart Jira. Now, luckily for this day, this happened in a development instance, and I'm the only user and the only human impacted. But my cat and I have since had a chat about his work performance. So the morale of this story is test any code outside of Jira, test any scripting in a sandbox environment. Even in cloud, there's scripting opportunities. Don't do it in production. And of course, be sure to close all markup tags, because one little missing tag can cause Jira pages not to render. All right, mistake number 5. This one I rated as high impact with 3 thumbs down. So as you know, regular cleanup is really important and it's needed to maintain any application. But unfortunately, one day my cleanup activities had some unknown consequences. So here's my story. So Jira comes with the link types shown, so you can link issues to other issues. And at one company, the list of link types grew to what you said to over 20 different options. And there's no good reason to have all of these. A lot of them were duplicates or unused. So my plan was, well, let's clean that up, right? Let's remove all the unused, outdated, and duplicate types. So I started that process, and Jira handled this perfectly. Jira will update or remove the link associations depending on what you choose. And I went on about this cleanup. So this action changed the updated date to today's date for all of the issues that I touched. And unfortunately, there was an internal application that was using Jira's REST API that I didn't even know about. And that application was using the updated date field to limit the scope of Jira pulled into their database. So while my change worked just fine in Jira, it caused an increase in the scope of their queries. Their queries timed out, and their app totally stopped functioning. They were not happy with me that day. So in this case, I didn't even know the application existed. So it's important to know what any apps that are using the REST API are doing, and that way you can consider them when making impactful changes. And one good thing to know, whatever permissions a user has in Jira, they have the same permissions in the REST API, and there's no way you can really stop them from using the REST API to do things. So user communication and education is really the best solve for a mistake like this. Because this one, very hard to plan for. So as you see, many updated dates were changed that day. And this is just for one of those link types, right? There were 15 that we didn't need. So there was a huge impact to their queries. Okay, so let's talk about some impactful changes and the way to avoid some of the mistakes that I've made, and also determine the risk of the change so you can prioritize properly. Now, of course, this is going to be different for everyone. You'll need to consider your organization's size, how Jira is used, how much data Jira has, what kind of data you're storing. And then, of course, if you have audit or compliance requirements to consider, your risk might be higher. And if other applications are connected or integrated, all sorts of other factors. So it's good to understand the size of your instance and plan accordingly. So let me give you two quick examples of two different kinds of organizations. So the second one has many more users, Jira projects, and therefore requirements. And a higher level of usage often means a more complex configuration. Not always, but I tend to see that. And the longer an application has been around, the more customizations and configurations they tend to have. So, changes that might be a quick fix and low risk for the first organization, that could be much more impactful for the second. So think back to my earlier mistake where I was missing a required field that broke a workflow, the thing I did yesterday. So that means that no issues could be transitioned from the to-do to the in progress status. So what is the impact of this seemingly simple error for those two different organizations? And well, the answer is that, it depends. The first organization, it's a small company and a small Jira operation. So you might think that the impact would also be small. But think about this. What if that organization had 100 Jira issues in the to-do status that are due today? Or what if all 20 users do all of their work in Jira and they can't get anything done? I've noticed that when Jira is down, software developers tend to go get coffee and maybe they come back to work later in the day and Jira is back up and ready for them. So it's important to understand how your organization's use of Jira and your specific configuration is going to impact risk, because it's not the same for every organization. All right, so here are the questions I ask myself every time I make a Jira configuration change. And let's kind of answer them together using that same workflow change example in those organizations. So first I ask, okay, how large is this change for my organization? So for example, will adding a transition validator, is it going to impact one Jira project or 18 projects? And then next, how many of the users rely on those impacted Jira projects? And then what are those users doing in those Jira projects? All that information will help you understand risk and scope. And then next, I try to figure out how long the change will take. Now, not just to make, but including any research, preparation, testing, extension. So in our example, adding a workflow validator takes longer to research than execute, right? But the research time is definitely worth it. And then next, will this change cost anything in terms of productivity? So think about possibilities like these. If I require a field, it could prevent the need for a human to request that information later, right? How many times did you get a Jira issue assigned to you and the information you need is not in there? So that might be a positive cost. But if you require a field too early in an issue's lifecycle, that might prevent forward progress or maybe even lead to inaccurate data. I'm sure some of your users have just, selected a random value or added a period so they could move forward without providing certain information in the workflow. And in that case, that's a bad opportunity or productivity cost, because bad data means bad reporting and therefore bad decision making. And then, of course, don't forget to consider their productivity costs when there's a problem with the change. How long is this change going to take to remedy or back out or fix? Always include those costs too. So, in my example, when users were waiting for the broken workflow fix while I was on vacation, there was definitely lost productivity. Okay, so let's take another simple example and kind of walk through a configuration change. So the boss asks us to rename the standard Jira Service Management field from impact to outcome. Seems simple. What could go wrong? So what's the first thing you might do as a Jira administrator? Well, for me, I would start by looking at the field in the admin area to understand where it's currently used. So in Jira Server and Data Center, it will tell you the screens and the context. And then in Jira Cloud, it also shows the projects and the last use of the field. So the fact that the field was used today tells me that this is something I need to pay a lot of attention to. There's not legacy data that nobody's using anymore. When I make this change, important data be impacted for people currently using it. So this field, you can see it's on 41 screens and it's used by 5 different Jira projects. So from there, next I would open up the 5 Jira projects and look at the users in each project role and in the permission schemes. And you can also do a quick JQL query to get the names of some of the frequent assignees and reporters. If there are lots of issues, I just export them and I open them in Excel. And then I use Excel's remove duplicates function to get a unique list of reporters and assignees. So now this tells me who's actually using this project, who's using it recently, and who do I need to, if something goes wrong, who do I need to warn before I make my change. And if you have data center or server, you can get that information out of the database as well. So next, how long is this change going to take? And again, it's the change itself is super quick, right? It's a 30-second change, but it's the research, the testing, the communication, and the fixes that tend to take a long time. So make sure that that is all accounted for. In terms of productivity, what would happen if I made this change and something went wrong? So what downtime might that cost? That all has to factor into the cost of making this change. And then, of course, our opportunity costs, does this change provide any business value? In my opinion, no. It's just renaming because the boss liked the other name better. I don't see any business value in this change. But I know a lot of you get a lot of the boss said to do this kinds of requests. I don't see any cost savings here, and we're adding risk. We're not adding risk. And then, of course, what other things could the Jira administrator be working on that are maybe a little bit more important than this little pet request? Okay, so what could go wrong? Super simple. Everything could go wrong, right? So Jira handles this fairly well, right? Jira will update the screens, those 41 screens where the field lives. And these days, Jira will also update the workflow behaviors. And I feel like that's kind of new. I feel like when I was using Jira Server more, it didn't used to do that for me. It would kind of just corrupt my workflow, but maybe that's been fixed Jira wide, and that's lovely. So if I have a condition or a validator where that field is referenced, it will automatically be updated. So that's really nice. But what wasn't handled by Jira? So all those hundreds of filters your users create all the time, those break. And the only way to fix them is to manually fix them. So here's how I handle this. If I have data center or server, I do a quick database query and find out which JQL queries people are using that contain the field name or the field ID that I'm about to change. And then I email those people and say, hey, by the way, on Friday, we're changing impact to outcome. Here's the list of the filters that you need to either update, or maybe you can get rid of them because they're old and clean up your own filter list. And I can get that exact data very easily in server and data center. In cloud, it's very hard to do. So I try to figure out who's impacted and just send a more generic message that says, hey, we're about to make this change. Please check your filters. Also in data center, and well, actually, I think in all application types, you can change the filter owner to yourself, make the change for the user, and then change it back to them if you're feeling super nice. And there aren't thousands too. So what else might have broken? Automation rules. Definitely broke automation rules. The change does not get automatically made here. And actually, if you notice something else in this query on the left, the wording of the selection values has changed too. So impact high, if we go back one slide, impact extensive / widespread. So this rule has probably been broken much longer than if you just recently changed the name of the field. So the rule didn't fail because it wasn't invalid. It was running. It just never matched that JQL query. So this rule's probably been broken for quite a long time. So what else? What are the known unknowns? So are there any other apps or integrations using this field? It's hard to know, right? The only way to know is to go digging. I always say if you're a Jira administrator, you kind of have to be a detective and an investigator. You have to go in and proactively look for things, proactively break things, not in production, of course, to understand how things work. And then think about where could things be hiding that just aren't as obvious. Okay, so I'd like to make a list for me of what I consider a low risk example and what's a high risk of a change. So for me, things users can do, I can pretty much undo all of those, except issue deletion, of course. Renaming custom fields is probably pretty low risk, depending. Notifications, components, archiving projects and issues, because in data center and cloud premium and enterprise, you can unarchive with a one button click. So low risk to me. And then the high risk stuff, think about things that only admins can do. Oh, you know what? I misspoke. Let me go back. So the lower risk is renaming the selections within a custom field. Higher risk is renaming the custom field itself. And then also anything that has to do with security or permissions. The fourth bullet, adding issue security level. So why is this high risk? Well, for me, two reasons. One, because it deals with security, period. And two, because lots of security levels impacts performance. So you got to think about different types of risk as well. And then, of course, anytime you add, remove, update, anything that is connected or integrated with, to me, that's high risk. So let's talk about ways to manage change. And of course, as I said earlier, mistakes are learning experiences, right? So not everything is going to go perfect. For me, I say, go in and try to break things to understand how they work in the background. If you have data center or server, go take a look at the database, like read only, right? Don't make changes directly in the database. But go take a look at how things are stored. And that solved so many mysteries for me and made me understand kind of how Jira works in the background. And that helps me kind of predict what my change could cause that maybe isn't even surfaced in the UI. Okay, to manage change. Obviously, you need a test environment and a test plan. And I feel like I shouldn't even have to say this, but so many organizations I've worked with don't have a test environment at all, not a single one. And I'm just like, what? You're developing software. You have 8 test environments for your software, but none for Jira? Why is that? So luckily, there are easy solutions for this. Um, there's a cloud sandbox that's now available for premium and enterprise that you can utilize. And Salto's got a great article on their website, everything you need to know about this newer feature of Cloud Premium and Enterprise. So go check that out. It's an isolated environment. It's got the same user limit as production and the application that it's linked to. And the sandbox gets its own URL, but it's similar to the production URL, so it's easy to tell when sandbox versus production. And if you are not in, oh, sorry. So if you're an Atlassian Marketplace developer, there's also a free development instance that you can sign up for. And this instance is subject to the Atlassian developer terms, and that's separate from the regular terms of service. So make sure you check that out. And the developer license is limited to 5 users. So if you're interested in this, you can read more about it at developer.atlassian.com. Other ideas? You can also create a second application and pay for just a few users. There's also a free version of Cloud these days. It's just like the paid version, there's less features. It doesn't include issue permissions or project permissions, so it won't help you test any of those. So good thing to know. That's why I kind of prefer the previous ideas. Next, you could start a new free trial. Sometimes this is helpful if you're testing the features of a different cloud plan and you don't want to upgrade or downgrade the live application. And of course, if you have no better option, at least create a test project in the production application and apply all your scheme changes there. Okay, so for server and data center folks hosting their own software, there's a free license for development and testing purposes. Just have your typical contact log in to my.atlassian.com, sorry, my.atlassian.com, and you can generate the dev license. And I recommend making sure that the test environment settings match production as much as possible. So don't forget to include things like reverse proxies, SSL, load balancer settings, anything that could impact the application itself. And there's also a 30-day free trial available. And if you've got no better option, create that test project in prod. So it doesn't matter what method you choose, just make sure you have a place to test your changes before you unleash them on your users. Here are a couple tips for your test environment. I always like to disable email because I want to avoid notifying end users with fake or duplicate data. And then I also recommend matching the test environment settings exactly to production as much as possible. I know that's kind of hard to do, but the more you can do, the better your test results will mirror reality. And then, of course, use this environment to test the impact of anything that's like a major configuration change or an app install, maintenance activities, all sorts of things like that. Next, a standard set of steps will help you verify application stability after any major change. So obviously you need test cases that are specific to the change that you made, but also I like to have a standard set of just regression tests, common things that you expect to always work regardless of the type of change you made. So I created a little worksheet for myself. You can download it at the URL shown and customize it for your needs. Not all the things I look for will apply to you, but it's a great start. And a little tip is I just create a regression testing issue, and then I create one subtask for each test point. And then each time a regression test is needed, I just clone it, so it's ready to go. So check out this worksheet for high-level tests that cover a broad area just to verify some standard functions. Okay, next is custom schemes and templates for your configuration. So not talking about Jira project templates here, but I'm talking about your own set of schemes that you create for different purposes. So Jira comes loaded with all those defaults to get you started. But before you start building a custom scheme for every project, decide how many that you as a Jira administrator are even going to support. So here's my recommendation. I create 3 project setups. One is a set of schemes specifically for development type work, and then a different set of schemes for support and task-based projects. So let's use development as an example. So in this case, I might have an issue type scheme with, all the issue types that development uses, like epic, storybug, task, subtask. And then the dev screens in this template will have all the dev specific fields, stuff like fix version, FX version, story points, sprint, all that good stuff. And then the bug's going to have a special workflow and some specific fields like step to reproduce and expected result. So that's a super common dev configuration. I create this, I document all the settings so the team knows what each template contains. And then I start the team off with this template until there's a real business need for a custom configuration. I feel like most of the time, users can do just fine with one of these 3 templates. And then if we have a super special use case, well, then we talk about custom schemes to maintain. So next, obviously, regular cleanup and maintenance will lower the scope of your application, make changes less risky. So here are the things I look for, and I do about a quarter cleanup myself personally in my own Jira applications. Do it as often as it makes sense for your use cases. But so some common mistakes. Are there statuses that should be resolutions instead? Are there any issues missing resolutions? I look for stuff like that, data issues that will impact reporting. Also look for security, global things, permission problems. Is the access that's being granted intended? Are the roles appropriate for that organization and their size? Are the users and groups used properly in permission schemes? I also look for unneeded or duplicate settings. So are there multiple workflows for the same process? Is there both a bug and defect issue types? To me, those are dupes. I see that a lot. And then any unused project screens, custom fields, apps, projects not used within whatever amount of days, 90 days, whatever. Fields not used on any screens, expired free trials. All of this is just extra junk in your database. And again, the lower the scope, the less likely the risk. Okay, so next is my maintenance plan. And this is kind of like the other worksheet that I use this every time we're going to do a big cleanup. I'm sorry, I use this every quarter when we do our quarterly maintenance. So decide what kinds of actions you're going to perform, and then how often you're going to do them, and then how are you going to communicate those activities to end users, because sometimes they'll be impacted with some of what you're doing. So I have about 23 things that I do, usually quarterly, like I said, but you can download this scheduled maintenance worksheet and help identify some actions and document your own plan. Okay, next thing you can do is obviously have strong change management practices and a communication plan. So what should be tracked? For me, my personal rule is I document the changes that only application or system admins can make. All the other stuff that users can make, I don't bother with. So like I wouldn't track adding a component to a project because a project level admin can do that. But I would track things like adding a new app or creating a new permission scheme or setting up incoming mail handler. The only way to communicate with your other admins what you're doing is to actually track that and make that available for them to see. So why bother? Sounds like I just gave everybody homework, right? Well, Jira has an audit log, but it provides very little detail. So if you've ever looked at it, you'll see that it records some of the changes and stamps, but it can never capture why a certain change was made or who requested it and other change details. Sometimes it tells you there was a change, but not even what it was. And a lot of times there's no log at all. So it's really important to have the documentation. Think about future admins, or maybe even yourself if you need to look back in a year and say, wait a minute, why did we make that setting the way that it is? That stuff is going to be vital. And then just like in all software, there's multiple ways to achieve the same thing. And having documentation has saved me before when I've, differed from the way that I usually make a change. I can go back and I can read why did we do it that way? What factors influenced that decision? So I don't just automatically say, oh, well, this is wrong. Let's undo it. Let's fix it. And also good to know if you're using the free version of Jira Cloud, that version does include the audit log function at all. Next, I ask all of my admins to file their changes in some kind of application support project. And yes, you can use Jira to track Jira. It works perfectly unless you are upgrading or if you have managed downtime in server or data center. But think about where you track your changes today. I know for some people, like it's in your head or posted notes or emails. Just create a quick Jira project to do it. It'll be worth it in the long run. And honestly, I would like to do this for all internal apps, not just for Jira. So I do it anywhere I make a configuration change in any app that I have, and it just helps me understand change over time. So it could be a simple Jira request form like on the left, or you could use Jira Service Management on the right. Either way, just make sure you have some place that others can access so you can talk about changes that you're planning. In terms of communication, usually I like to send a before, a during, and an after message, depending on the scope of the change. So go grab this worksheet to kind of help you craft some of the messages. I try not to send just a generic, like all company memo about some kind of Jira configuration change. It's not going to make sense to me. So I try to tailor my messaging to, the leadership and stakeholders, and then users. They're two different groups with two different needs and two different sets of things that they care about. So I try to make sure my communications reflect that. And then number 5 is regular backup and export. Now, this is a challenge because in my opinion, Jira's backup and export options are not robust. I'll say it like that. So if you have server and data center, here are some of the backup options. Obviously, manual copies of the home directory, other files and attachments. You can take a regular server image. I've done that before. You can, take a regular database backup as well. When you're installing or upgrading Jira, there's an option to turn on an automatic database XML snapshot that you can utilize. And of course, there's great apps in the Atlassian marketplace to help you with backup and extend Jira's features. If you have cloud, your options are somewhat limited because obviously Atlassian is hosting the software. But there is a backup manager function that you'll find in the system admin area. And of course, there's also apps in the marketplace to help you with backup. And the reason I love this backup is because there's nothing you can really do with it as an admin except import it into another cloud application, right? It doesn't help you understand the configuration. It doesn't help you have like an incremental change log of what changed since the last time I did my backup. But I still run them and I save them to a repository so I at least have them and have some place to start if I ever need it. For exporting, you have lots of different options regardless of your application and deployment type. Obviously, you can print off stuff. You can export to different file formats. And then for configuration data, there's almost no way to nicely export anything. The only exception is workflows where you can get an XML copy of a single workflow, or JWB is Atlassian's proprietary workflow format. So again, it's just something that you could use to re-import, not do too much with. I have modified the XML before manually and then re-uploaded it into Jira, and it does work, but it's a little dangerous. So make sure to test that in the test environment first before you up your workflow. And of course, you can export automation rules in JSON format, but that's about it. If you want to back up your configuration, the only other thing that's plausible is really just take some screenshots. So that's a very manual process and not a very good strategy. So,
or you can use Salto, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes.
absolutely, absolutely. And then a couple other options that you have just to get to your data. There are some application logs that you can access. And again, we kind of talked about that earlier. It does not log everything, so it's kind of level. And then, of course, if you have cloud, you can export your users and billing history. For server and data center, I always took a backup of the users to the database through an SQL query because there's no tool in Jira to do it. So what now? Here are all those downloads that I talked about earlier. So I'll stop for just a second so you can take a quick picture or a screenshot. And then the articles on the right, I think, are really helpful. Atlassian talks about how they do change management and how you can use change management, not just for the work you do, but for Jira configuration too. And then there's a great article from Salto about best practices for just how to even deal with all of this configuration and customization. Because the more you customize and the longer you have your application, the more it grows, and then you have to deal with the implications of that. So next resource, obviously, the great apps in the Atlassian Marketplace at marketplace.atlassian.com. When you go here, search for keywords like audit and to kind of help you find things that might help. And a lot of I have a lot of books on Jira cleanup and how to maintain your Jira application. And of course, a bunch of courses for admins, users for both Jira and Confluence. So check those out in LinkedIn if you're interested. All right. And if you need help cleaning up or maintaining your Jira application, I'm here to answer questions you have. But I'll hand it over now to my friends at Salto, so Lior can share how apps help you can take control of your Jira configuration.
Thanks, Rachel. I can share that at some point, I think 6 years ago, I changed the status. I didn't listen to your talk, so I changed some status, and because some guy in the legal department asked me for some new status in Jira, and like 1 minute afterwards, I got messages from tens of engineers asking me why the to-do status in all the engineering issues changed to requires legal review or something like that.
That's a good
very
one.
funny day for me. Okay, we have a few questions in the Q&A, but I think maybe my talk can answer some of them. So I would like to walk you through what Salto does, not everything, 3 tiny slides and a short demo, which I think shows you how Salto can alleviate a lot of the pains and risks that Rachel mentioned. We'll answer the Q&A immediately after that. So let me share my screen. Okay, so Jira is broken again. Yeah, now you can see my screen. So with Salto, a lot of these things can be avoided. Salto can be, by the way, downloaded and installed in your Jira app for free today. So just check it out in the marketplace. So let's start with impact analysis. One of the things that Salto does best is just analyzing the relations between elements in your Jira configuration. So essentially, when admins use Salto, before changing or renaming or deleting any field status or what have you, just go to Salto, select that status, for example, and you can get a list of everything which depends on that, which uses that status, for example. So in this screenshot, you see some authorized status, which is being used in 21 of workflows. But you can also see that Salto detected it's used by one filter and 8 automations. And of course, if you click through, you get a full list of everywhere which this status is being used, including filters and inside JQL queries. So this is really powerful, and it makes it really easy to avoid errors like some of the ones Rachel showed you. And I'll show this live in a second. Everything which Rachel mentioned that Jira doesn't support out of the box, that you can delete things without Jira warning you, hey, you're going to crash some automations, we can solve this. Rachel talked a lot about testing your changes. So sure, you should have a sandbox. It can be, as Rachel mentioned, it can be the official Atlassian sandbox or just another instance. But let's say you tested all your changes there and you made a bunch of changes, okay? 10 changes across workflows, projects, fields. What do you do when you're done? Okay, so you tested everything works. Now what do you do in your production instance? How do you deploy them safely? If from what we've heard and from our conversations with Jira admins, copying these changes, even if you didn't in a sandbox like you should, copying these changes then to production is slow, and it's not perfect, right? It's error prone. If you forgot something, if you did something slightly differently the second time you implemented it, it's not great. So this is something which we automate in Jira cloud to cloud deployments or data center to data center deployments. Choose any two Jira environments and copy changes, copy configuration changes from one to another in a really nice automated safe process. And I'll show it in a second. The last thing which I wanted to mention is Rachel talked about export capabilities. So at the heart of Salto, our engine essentially converts all of your Jira configuration into files in a language that we call Knuckle, which means that now we track these environments and we actually put all these changes into a Git repository. So every time you make a change to a field, workflow, new project, what have you, we essentially commit that change to Git repository, which means that if you're following Rachel's advice and you have an application support project and you're for every configuration change, you actually have a ticket. Now you can link these tickets to a Git change, to a source control change, which accurately represents the configuration change that you've done. It's essentially working like developers, right? They open a Jira ticket, they link it to Git. You can open a Jira ticket for a change in Jira itself and link it to a Git commit. This also enables you to roll back changes that if you did accidentally break something, you can easily roll back it because you have all your configuration continuously backed up and versioned into Git. So easy to go back. I want to show you a very short demo of the things I mentioned. So this is the Salto platform. You can see on the left side here, I have various Jira environments connected to my Salto instance. And in the Jira sandbox, just I want to show you, I selected some field called SLA level. And you can see that I have a used by section. So I can see that this field SLA level is actually used by some automation and by two workflows. So this is the go-to tool before you make any Jira change, right? This is, by the way, what I just showed you is part of our free offering. So just go install Salto on your Jira instance, and you immediately get this impact analysis and the ability to see where things are used. You get this for free, so try it out. I'll post a link at the end of this session. Okay, so great. You've done your changes, you've done your impact analysis, you understand what happened, and you go to your sandbox and you implement, let's say you implement a new automation which uses this field, you tested it, and then you want to move it to production. I want to show you how easy it is to do with Salto. So I click compare and deploy. I want to deploy from my sandbox to my production environment, deploying new automation. What Salto now does is it compares these two environments. So it essentially shows me everything which I have on sandbox, but is still not in production. So let's find the automation that I want to move. Okay, great. So I have this automation, alert no, I'm on urgent SLA, which is an addition, which means it's something which exists in Sandbox, but doesn't exist on my production environment. By the way, I can deploy new things, I can deploy modifications or deletions. Every difference between Sandbox and production is something I can copy. But let's try to deploy this automation. So I select it for deployment. But think about it. What would happen if I would just move this automation without, for example, the field that it uses, right? This automation actually depends on the SLA level field, which I showed you. So Salto detects that. And once you select this automation for deployment, it tells you you have to select the following changes to ensure a successful deployment, right? You have to select this field as well. Okay, so I select this field. I still have one missing dependency. Let's see what it is. Okay, so this field has a field context as well, right? I can't really move the field without its context. So I select this, and I'm essentially, I'm done. Okay, this should work now. And once I click preview deployment, then with 2 more clicks, I can deploy this automation with its field and its context all the way to production. So I hope that completes the picture from Rachel's talk. Test things in production in a sandbox first, but do impact analysis before. You can do it with Salto, and once you're done, copy things from your sandbox to production, also in an automated fashion, and not doing things manually. So before we answer questions, if you want to stay in touch, these are the ways that you can reach Salto, our website or LinkedIn. There's a QR code here, which will take you to our app. So go install it, fetch your Jira instances, get impact analysis for free, and you can even try out the deployment features, which are part of our Pro tier. Okay, so let's see some of the questions. Rachel, I think the first one is for you. We have James asking, hey, Rachel, for cloud, what's your recommendation when it comes to early access or beta features? For example, priorities per project. Should we avoid them until they're generally available or enable and test them in the sandbox as a known difference?
So thanks, Jimmy, for the question. My response comes from my high level of risk aversion and fear. And it's not at all about Atlassian. I was a web developer before this, so my fear comes from that background. That I generally try to avoid those changes until somebody else has tested them and made sure that they're okay. But it's so useful to know what's coming. I hate it when I log in the morning and there's a brand new change, and now I'm like, oh, I got to tell all my users how to use this, or tell all my customers that this just changed in their Jira application. So what I would do is I would sign up for all of that early access stuff in its own environment, right? because I want to know about it. I want to be able to test it, but I don't want it even touching production. And one thing that I found, and I haven't found an official answer on this anywhere, but um, between cloud applications, when you signed up, some features are different. So like sometimes I'll go and I'll test in the first cloud instance I signed up for, like right when cloud started, and then I'll compare how it works in the cloud instance I signed up for last week, and things are slightly different. So that's just a tip for anybody if you're getting a cloud sandbox that's not part of Atlassian's official premium and enterprise offering, that there could be slight differences between those configurations.
Great, thanks. Next question from Vijay. Can we automate deploying changes from source code management integrated with Salto? So the answer is yes. We actually recently released our CI/CD features, which means that Salto, you can automate essentially everything. Salto connects to GitHub or GitLab or your own source control, and by using our CLI and APIs, you can essentially trigger deployments from source code changes. You can actually help use pull requests that help team members review changes of other team members. So when you start a deployment in Salto, you can get approval from another team member by creating a pull request out of that change. So we have a full integration with source control tools. Check it out. It's really cool. Next question. I think that would be the last one for today. By the way, if you have more, please write them now in Q&A. Last question is from Daniela. She's asking, can we create a new project in production, copying the configuration from our project, not by sharing, and testing the new configuration there? Rachel, I'll let you answer that, and then I'll add my own take.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I would want to have you think about one thing. So some organizations use their test environment as an exact copy of production, and the cloud premium and enterprise sandbox offering has the ability to sync data so you can do exactly what you're asking. But some other companies use the sandbox as not a copy of production, a place to try things and test things. So like for me, the very best setup would be like a development sandbox, and then like a testing sandbox, and then your real production application. So I know I just made that more complicated for everyone to have three to maintain, but I had one company try to kind of do both, right? They tried to use one sandbox to be their production testing and one for their experimentation. And the admins just kept overriding each other by syncing data, right? One admin would try something new that they just weren't sure what was going to happen, and then another admin would sync and it would blow away that data. So definitely think about how you're going to use your sandbox and make sure all your other admins are on the same page.
Thanks. One more thing I'll add. If by the way, if what you mean is internally copying the project, essentially creating a copy on the same instance, that can work. However, when we talk to admins about that, it usually clutters the instance very quickly. And again, you suffer from the same problem that when you need to copy all the configuration back. It's a lot of manual work, and you may get things a bit confused there, especially if it's inside the same instance. So I support what Rachel said. Get another instance. It can be the official sandbox, or even not the official sandbox, just another test instance or a free instance, and use that to test your changes, deploy the project from production there, make your changes, then deploy it back. One last question. This is really the last one. Vijay, any plans of moving projects from one instance to another with Salto? That's possible today. You can move an entire new project or a modified project from your sandbox to your cloud production, or from your test data center Jira instance to another production data center Jira instance. Choose any two environments. Salto can help you move projects, huge projects with everything inside, or individual statuses within workflows. You choose which elements to deploy from one environment to another. We don't do issues yet. Salto deals today with metadata, with configuration. There are other tools which can help you move the issues afterwards, a lot of tools and export capabilities, but we handle the heavy lifting of the configuration itself. Okay, Rachel, thank you so much for being here today. It was insightful and reminded me of a lot of things from my past, which I hope not to remember, but here we are. So thanks again. This was helpful. And thanks for everyone who attended. We will publish the webinar recording to be sent over email and in our website. Thank you.